thank you. Good morning, all. Thank you all for showing up so early in the afternoon on Saturday. I have been working on technology policy and how this relates to free as in freedom software and also information security. Those are really interrelated, and it's become, thanks to Mr. Snowden, very easy to explain how that's true. So I'm going to go through about 15 years of my experience in these areas in about 30 minutes. So yes, it's going to be quick. All the pictures you can see, you can download later and of course reuse for your own purposes. And I'm going to be here over the weekend, so anybody who wants to talk to about any more specific subject, just approach me later and we can make an appointment. I hope to be back at the end of the month to do a series of specific workshops, also for journalists, on how to do sort of information security at the individual level. So this is going to be a little bit about tech policy and a little bit about sort of the hands-on side of security. So a bit of both. I'm making some basic assumptions because often when I talk about this, people say, "Oh, that's never going to work because our governments are corrupt and companies are corrupt and the world is badly screwed." And that's all probably true. But then there are still some principles that we can maybe apply or we can pretend that's true. So I, for instance, think that in many of the areas I talk about, European governments have pretty much completely failed to do what they're supposed to do, which is to protect the rights of their citizens. But that doesn't mean that they can do so in the future. So I think it's still worthwhile, and at least in some countries, and we might just be one of those countries, to at least pretend that we're a democracy and see if we can push it in the right direction. So in the summer of 2013, Obama had planned a trip to Berlin, which he had also visited prior to his election as a US president. And when he was in Berlin in 2007, or 2008, he was actually sort of cheered on by about 250,000 people when he did a talk in front of the Brandenburger Tor. It was like a Kennedy-type moment. And then, of course, he had planned this other trip in the summer of 2013 to Berlin. And 2 weeks before he actually went to Berlin, it had already been planned. People had come to Berlin to weld all the man covers shut from the sewers and stuff, so that bombs couldn't be put in there. And 2 weeks before he went, a young man called Edward Snowden took a USB stick and got on a plane to Hong Kong, and then handed that USB drive to a bunch of journalists, who then proceeded to basically tear the US a new asshole in the media. So Obama comes to Berlin, and only a few thousand people now show up for his talk instead of 250,000. And this was the viral image that got mailed to everybody by everybody in Germany for a big part of the summer of 2013. If you didn't get this in the email or through social media, you just clearly were not having a lot of friends. So for those who are not very well versed in German, which if you're Greek I can completely understand, on principle, the girl asks Obama, "My daddy says that you can look into my computer." And Obama answers, "That is not your daddy." And it is a joke, but it's also not a joke, because this is actually the mission of the NSA. So the NSA are very clear and very unabashed about their strategic goal is to literally know everything. And they mean that quite literally. So any piece of information on the planet pertaining to anything, they want to have their own copy, ideally in real time, and they want to be able to correlate it to any other piece of information. Not that all of us are terrorists or scary, but maybe in the future you might become an important person, and then it's good to know that what drugs you took when you were 19 and in university, and who you had sex with, and were they married at the time to somebody else, and all that good stuff. So we've had a series of wonderful PowerPoint presentations, because that's how big organizations nowadays talk to each other. They send each other these PowerPoint presentations. And the NSA is a big organization, and so they have lots of these presentations where they explain between the departments that this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. And so all the theories that information security specialists have had about the ways that you can tap the internet in general, parts of the internet services, but also things like specific mobile phones. It's been theorized about for certainly over a decade, but we could never prove it. Now, of course, thanks to Mr. Snowden, we have actual documentary proof made by the people who are doing the spying. So that should completely change the situation, when actually the people who are doing the crime send you the detailed technical documentation of how they're doing it. So instead of theorizing about how somebody is maybe doing something to you, you can now just point, well, this is what they say they do. So this is a turbine, part of the turmoil group of technologies, where if you request a Facebook page, for instance, which in generally, by the way, you shouldn't do, but lots of people still do it. So your browser asks facebook.com, please send me a web page. And then, of course, Facebook server builds the web page for you and then sends it to you. But our British friends at GCHQ, they run a big chunk of the European fiber optic network. And so what they can do is they can insert another page that they craft, which has different information and or possibly a computer virus built into it, which they can also send back to your browser. And because they have control over fiber optics, they can make sure that their page gets to your browser first. It's like 1 millisecond sooner, but that's all it takes. And then that's the page that will be loaded, and it looks like a Facebook page. It's completely genuine. It's got all the certificate and the digital signatures and all the stuff. And so your browser will say, this is the web page that I requested, and loads it. And then, either you see information that isn't true, or maybe a computer virus is wrong. So this is just one of those many things where targeted sort of hacking of systems is now done at an industrial scale. So where the Stasi could maybe follow about 20,000 German citizens by employing 25% of the German population, the NSA can just, in an automated fashion, hack millions of computers of people who, will never know. So if you have an iPhone, do not think of it as a phone, think of it as a tracking device that you are allowed to make phone calls with. It's really not your phone. It's Apple's phone and it's the NSA's phone, and on occasion they will allow you to make phone calls with it, but it's really not your phone and you are not in control. It's already completely backdoored when it comes out of the box. Now that's an annoying reality, but that is now a reality. We have the documentary proof. It's no longer a point of discussion. The point of discussion is now what are we going to do about it? And so, maybe getting another phone might be a good idea, although actually, I'm not sure that the other phones are much better. So, it turns out the NSA wasn't the only ones who completely backdoor the iPhones. The CIA actually ran their own project in parallel to create their own backdoors, because apparently the CIA doesn't trust the NSA. So, you're getting screwed from several sides. And I'm sure there's Chinese stuff in there as well, because of course, all these things are made in China now, right? So what the CIA did, they developed their own little bugs, I can't say this. They developed their own little bugs, which they actually inserted into the software that is used by Apple developers and people who develop software for Apple products. So it's like the software development toolkit itself is backdoored. And that means that any software developed with that toolkit is also backdoored, and then all those apps end up on all these shiny Apple products, which are then completely insecure. So there are at least 3 parties that are probably sort of in your iPhone or your iDevice if you have one, which is the NSA and a bunch of other agencies. The CIA has their own backdoor for their own purposes, and then there's probably the Chinese in there, and maybe some other people, I don't know, the Mossad or the Pakistani intelligence, or it's just one big happy family. And this is all happening on a little piece of glass in your pocket. It's all of this stuff. Essentially, we're at the point now where we can, with fair confidence, say that all US technology is no longer trustworthy and will not be trustworthy until we see regime change, which is probably going to take a bit. So the real answer is sort of, okay, can we get off all of this? Because most Western countries literally run on all this stuff. I don't know exactly how it is here in Greece, but I know from the Netherlands or Germany or the UK that if you switch off telecommunications and the internet, within a day all supermarkets run out of fresh milk, because their logistics infrastructure runs over the internet. And so essentially everything just stops in a few days, very quickly. But on the other hand, we can't trust it. We literally cannot trust this stuff or anything anymore. So it should be replaced, and that's going to be a 10-year project, which is very annoying and costly, but it might be better to do that than to just surrender to US dominance. So this is one of the specific technologies that the NSA used to infiltrate computers that are kept completely offline, so they can't do their usual trick of over the internet infiltration. They will put a chip in like a USB plug, or it can also be in like the panel of a battery or something like that. And this chip, when it is inserted into the system, can inject a virus, which can then do other things like trying to put the system online if it still has the hardware for that. It can also record all the keystrokes and then broadcast them as a radio signal, which then can be picked up by somebody a couple of kilometers away with a good antenna or with a drone that flies over it or something like that. Now, how do these chips get into the things that you individually plug into your computer because you just bought them? Well, maybe you bought them online, and so when you buy something online, you're basically, say from an online retailer like Amazon, you're basically telling all kinds of parties, including Amazon, but not limited to Amazon, that specific piece of electronics is going to come to your workplace or your house, and you're going to plug it into the things where you're doing stuff with information. So if you are a person of interest to any of these agencies, what then happens is that the little box through the postal system on its way to you is taken out of the postal stream at 3 in the morning, and a bunch of CIA operatives, which might be private hired contractors, physically open the box. They add these chips and maybe software and other stuff. Then they reseal the box with all the official stickers and tapes and stuff, and put it back into the postal stream, and it arrives on your doorstep exactly at the moment where you expected it. This is an actual photo from a CIA training manual, so I'm not making this up. So this is like their internal documentation of this is how we do this stuff. And we don't know exactly at the scale of which this happens. Probably not all of us are individually interested enough to warrant this kind of surveillance, but certainly if you're a serious politician, on occasion asking naughty questions about the US or Israel, or if you're, a serious person within a big company that competes with US commercial interests, stuff like that, or if you're a journalist that says something nice about WikiLeaks, then certainly you might be sort of on that list. So now all this stuff, of course, sounds completely batshit crazy. And certainly if you theorize about the possibilities of these things before Snowden, you were considered to be completely crazy. I speak from experience. But now, of course, again, we have the documentary proof, and so that really should change the discussion. But certainly it hasn't changed the discussion enough in Europe. Different in, for instance, Brazil, where now it is national policy to essentially exclude US companies as much as possible. So not just have they kicked out all the US IT companies, they've also basically kicked out Boeing for servicing their Air Force, for instance, because they don't trust them either anymore. There, of course, the president herself has an experience with totalitarian governments, and it was then monitored by the NSA, so she didn't take very kindly to that. Strangely enough, Frau Merkel, of course, also has experience with totalitarian regimes because she grew up in East Germany, but doesn't seem to mind too much that her phone was being tapped 8 years before she became Chancellor of Germany. And so by extension, we can assume that every politician in Europe who might in the future amount to something is already being monitored by these agencies. Now, the US and some friends have also decided that cyber war is a really good thing to do. So in 2010, they launched this computer virus called Stuxnet into the world with the intention of taking down Iranian nuclear civilian installations, which they actually succeeded in, partially, thereby signaling to Iran and the rest of the world that cyber war is now a permanent and ongoing thing and will not be preceded by a declaration of war. So we are technologically capable of taking down your civilian industrial infrastructure, and we will do so whenever we please. That's the signal. And Iran really understood the signal. So they went shopping to Russia for military hardware, and they are now preparing their own cyber war tools. And of course, all the other countries got the signal very loud and clear. So Russia, China, Brazil, Pakistan, everybody is now tooling up. Now, of course, the problem with cyber weapons is that they are a lot easier to copy than tanks and aircraft carriers and jet fighter planes. So now everybody has copies of the Stuxnet virus who wants one. You can just grab it off the internet. It's an open source tool now. So if you have ambition to take down any industrial piece of infrastructure that runs on Siemens industrial controllers, which almost everything on this planet does, then yeah, you just grab a copy of Stuxnet and you go to town on whatever factory you want to take down. Of course, the Western countries are much more vulnerable to this sort of stuff than any other part of the planet because we are so highly automated. So throwing weapons around in unstable places of the world is generally not a good idea, as we are now seeing in Iraq. But throwing cyber weapons around on a planet that is not very stable is really, really, really stupid. But this is where we are now. Now, the NSA and friends continue to claim that they're all doing it for the good of the country and the safety of Western democracy and human rights and yada yada yada. There is actually absolutely no proof that any of the spying that we've been informed about has ever been about counterterrorism. And the NSA has precisely stopped 0 terrorism incidents, despite spending over $1 trillion since 9/11 on whatever it is that they are doing. So a former guy from the German security services now is very open about it, that this is all about industrial espionage. And it is about manipulating political processes. such as in the climate negotiations in Copenhagen in 2009, where the US delegation had been given detailed briefs by the US intelligence community about who were in all the other delegations from all the other countries. So the US negotiators had access to every phone call, every email, and every mouse click of all the other negotiators from all the other countries. So imagine what that does to your negotiating position, when you know everything about all the other people, both professional and private. You know, every joint they ever wrote in, they smoked, every little affair they might have had, you know, other stuff, children out of wedlock, you can imagine this kind of stuff. So we are in pretty deep shit. This is really quite serious. Because right now there is no privacy if you're using anything that connects to the internet. You know, medical privacy is essentially ceased to exist, and our politicians can be manipulated for whatever foreign policy purpose there is. And they are. You know, European corporations are stolen from by US corporations. We know this now. So the problem really is this. The NSA budget, 78 billion is the officially acknowledged part. It's probably significantly higher, more like 100 to 120 billion a year. So that makes it actually significantly larger than most countries on the planet. But actually, when you look at it globally, it's really not that much money. It's about 10 cents on the dollar for every sort of, internet user on the planet. About 5 billion of them. And why is it so cheap for the NSA to monitor most of us for a tenth of a dollar per day, to a level that, would make the Stasi drool in their beds? It's because most of us don't do anything to counter it, right? We go to google.com and we type in what we're interested in. We give it all away. We type it into Facebook. We walk around with spy phones in our pockets that report our physical location every 15 minutes to Apple. And then, of course, Apple has to report it to the NSA because that's what the Patriot Act does. So most of us don't do anything to prevent all this information leaking out, and therefore we do most of the work for them. We buy the hardware, we carry the devices, and we don't really protect our data streams. So I suggest that if you are an activist or a journalist or a politician or somebody in technology who really wants to make a difference beyond just making a bit of money, then there is stuff that you can do yourself, and there is stuff that you can help other people do, where we take the cost of monitoring you from about 10 cents per day to something like $100,000 a day, with some basic tools, all of which are, of course, free software. You can go back to a level where if US intelligence wants to have all this information about you, they still can, but they will have to do it the old way. They will have to physically follow you around, which means that they need to dedicate 20 to 25 people to you full time, which they can do, by the way. If you're a really, really interesting person, I don't know, say you're the finance minister of Greece, I'm just throwing it out there, and you're making life difficult for the IMF, yeah, they probably have 25 people to spare somewhere to keep tabs on you. But for most of us, they're not going to do this for the entire global population. So again, then we take it back to a much lower level. So some people will still be surveilled, and that's terrible, but it's not going to be all of us. And so these are things that we can do by encrypting our emails, by not using certain US services and things. Now, the crazy thing about the whole Snowden affair is that it really is not news, in some sense. Because the European Commission, or the European Parliament, actually got a report in 2001 that already detailed the kind of US foreign spying that was going on European soil, against European political institutions, against European companies, and even against European citizens. The report detailed all these things and said, look, you can solve some of these problems, but then you need to do IT differently. You need to do local services in Europe, run by Europeans on European soil. You need to get off all this foreign technology stuff. It literally mentioned free software and open source software to run critical services on. It also suggested that we would just teach everybody some basic computer security. So, in the 1800s, we had these very advanced theories in biological science called, bacteria, which was then the cutting edge of biological science back in the 1850s. Of course, fast forward 150 years and we teach this to 6-year-olds, right? All 6-year-olds are told, look, after you've been to the bathroom, wash your hands. And because most of them do that, with some level of diligence, and we have a few other things, we don't have cholera epidemics anymore in most of the Western world. So that's really good. So something that was technologically very advanced at some point is now become general knowledge and is accepted as a normal set of behaviors. So I don't see any reason, and I've actually done it, but you can teach 14-year-olds how to do encrypted email. It takes about an hour, and you can teach most of them. It's easy. And we should have been doing that since 2000, when we first learned about all this stuff. We haven't done that, and so now we've wasted about 15 years not teaching a whole new generation how to protect themselves against foreign stuff. So this report was actually delivered to the EU Parliament in July 2001. And then it was debated briefly, and then it was August where everybody went on holiday. And then the European Parliament came back from holiday in the first week of September 2001, and they were going to continue to discuss the reports. And then also discuss some of these policy measures, such as buying less foreign software, using free software, and all that stuff. And then, of course, slightly later into September 2001, something happened in New York, and then the report basically went into the drawer, and we were now at war, and we had to stand by our big Atlantic allies and stuff. Many European governments have actually discussed doing some of these measures for both strategic and economic reasons, but it's always been fairly effective to sort of lobby down, both by foreign government lobbying and by foreign corporate lobbying. Governments up to now are regrettably at best completely incompetent, and maybe we can make some of them less than completely incompetent just by explaining some of this stuff. So I'm hoping to maybe help out some people here in doing that, because I think Greece might actually be the place where we can do some stuff. So the problem, this is how I explain technology policy to managers mostly. This is a picture I actually made in 2001 to explain the problem of Verilog to non-technical people. So when you buy hardware like laptops or servers, that's a good working market. It's like cars. There are many brands, and they have like very cheap models and very expensive models and lots of in between, and there is a fairly high level of choice that you can make. But then, as soon as it comes to software, there's a real problem that actually you get very little choice. Now, I don't know the Greek situation, but I know that in the Netherlands it is impossible to buy a laptop without also buying a Windows software license, unless you buy an Apple. So the free market is, your choice is Pepsi or Coke. That's the freedom of choice that we have, Pepsi or Coke. But that's pretty much it. So in most organizations, they have all these complex sets of software that does stuff together, but it's all tied into these lower level layers. So there is no freedom of choice. And then the problem is, of course, if your entire information processing is determined by a handful of foreign companies, how much actual freedoms do you have to even do what it is you're doing? Because IT usually isn't the goal, it's just a tool to do other stuff. But if that entirely is determined by a company with very specific commercial interest to sell you a bit more every year and to keep you on the endless treadmill of upgrades, then who's really in charge here? So if you do nothing, and so this is actually what has been happening over the last decade plus, then more and more of your technology policy will basically be determined by a commercial company who is under control of a foreign government under the Patriot Act. And so your data is fundamentally insecure. It's not even no longer securable. It's just hopeless. And whatever it is that you're doing with IT is actually now largely determined by the commercial and strategic interest of a foreign corporation. Now this, to me, does not sound compatible with democracy. So if a private company wants to be screwed by Microsoft or IBM or Oracle, then that's their prerogative. And if they become too expensive or too stupid because of that, then they'll lose business. And I'm completely fine with that as well, because I do believe in some sort of free market-ish model. But when a national government, where I don't get to choose who I get services from, when they are under de facto control by a foreign commercial company, and in case of Microsoft, they are a multiply convicted economic criminal, so they should not be running government policy if we generally consider ourselves to be democracies, then we have a real problem. And so this is now happening, right? So if you're an end user and you buy a laptop with a Windows license, you're not allowed to transfer that license to another piece of hardware. It's now literally locked to the hardware. Of course, the same is true for all the tablets and all that stuff, but those are even more hopeless, like like an iPad or all those tablets. They're really like mobile phones that you can't make phone calls with, but they're mobile phones in any other sense, and so you have even less control there. So this is, I think, what we should strive for, where we say there are really only two flavors of technology in any organization that we use to do our stuff. There's the generic stuff, which is really not very sexy, but we all need it, like a print server, or a word processor, or a web browser, or email. It's not the stuff that makes us special, but we all need it. Okay, so we can use commodity things for that, meaning free software and hardware that complies with open standards and that does not lock us down into anything else. And then there's a few special things that most organizations will have. The stuff that makes them special. Whether you're a government, you're a local government, or a national government, or you're a company that does certain stuff, and those are your core applications. And that is something you should really be in control of, because that is really what you are, right? Many organizations nowadays is processing information. That's what they do. They really don't do anything else. Governments in generally, what they do is process information. They don't physically build things. They hire a company to physically build things for them. So governments, especially processing information, that's entirely what they do for us. And that's also important that when they do that they are completely in control of that process. And they cannot be in control of that process if the software and even maybe the hardware that runs it is under control of foreign powers. Then you're just a colony of the US, which most of us, at least partially, are at this moment, effectively. So the other thing that has happened to the internet over the last, certainly, 15 years, is that it's become very centralized. So it used to be distributed, a true internet, a network of networks where all are equal. And it's in the endpoint where all the action is. Of course, now we have a situation where a handful of US companies run the bulk of all the internet communications. And it's pretty hard, if you're a not educated user, to not use any of those services. Right? And I guest lecture at a couple of universities in the Netherlands, and it's impossible there to even attend university without having a Gmail account. Now this is the publicly funded Dutch, nominally democratic country, university education. But you cannot participate in that education if you don't have a Gmail account, because the entire university runs on G-apps. Other universities use Facebook groups as digital classrooms. So you need to have a Gmail account and a Facebook account, which is tied to your name, to get higher education. And this is where we are, and this is in the so-called liberal, moderate, progressive Netherlands. Which I regret to say as a Dutch citizen, but that's where we are. So we need to take it back to decentralization, because that's good. Decentralization will make it harder to do censorship, it will make it harder to do mass surveillance, and it will make it easier for groups of citizens to do their own thing on their own network. So we really need to take it back, and we need to try to get off these big central behemoths that are trying to run our lives. So there are lots of aspects to IT policy, and all the important ones have nothing to do with the technology per se, but they have to do with other, much more fundamental stuff. So when government supplies e-government websites to do your taxes, it should not be an Internet Explorer only website. And it wasn't so long ago that was actually a normal thing. Well, again, certainly in some of the Northern European countries that I'm familiar with. But I think now, certainly post-Snowden, the most important technology policy sort of agenda item should be, do we still have national sovereignty? Are we, as a Greek democracy, still in charge of our own fate? Or are we completely run now by Microsoft, the NSA, and the IMF? And we can vote what we want because it doesn't matter, because all our phones are tapped and all our servers are manipulated. This is a really fundamental question of whether you are you just a democracy like, the Soviet Union was a democracy where everybody gets to vote but it doesn't matter because the government always gets in? Or are you a democracy in the original Greek meaning of the word? That would be nice to have that. I would say that we have it now in most European countries only at a very, very limited level. I think Germany is still doing somewhat okay, Switzerland is maybe doing okay, Iceland seems to be doing somewhat okay, but most of the other countries are pretty badly screwed right now. But that doesn't mean that we can fix things, and I think we should work towards that. So, in government, in the modern world, a law becomes reality through information technology because of information processing. If you have state benefits or state pensions, or funding for universities, or any other of those decisions that governments make, they only become real in the real world if a lot of computer and information processing is done, so that actually the right people get the right money, or the right permits, or the right piece of information. And so controlling these systems literally is the question of whether you are, a national country that is in control of its own fate, or whether you are a digital colony. It is really that fundamental. And so, computer technology and IT and software is really very, very political, much more than technology. Because the technical questions usually are actually not that complex. you know, once you get down with a bunch of technical experts, you can usually, you know, figure this out and fix your problem. But if you don't do it within the right political and social framework, then you're going to end up with a monster, and that's where most of us has done. So if a government works for its citizens and not for the IMF, then it should be able to sort of tell its citizens what it's doing. So free software and open source, yeah, maybe that is the basis if you want to be a real democracy in the original Greek sense of it. I think it's a good idea. So I wrote a whole thing about this, which is on my blog, which you can read both in Dutch if you're capable and in English, which might be easier, where I put some links and some numbers to this thing. Europe typically has spent something like 100 billion euros per year on foreign software, mostly US software. 100 billion euros. That leaves our economy, and in return we get US espionage infrastructure delivered in our bedroom, in our parliaments, in our companies, in our hospitals, in the lawyers' offices, in our doctors' speaking rooms, everywhere. 100 billion euros. What if we would just stop buying that crap and took 100 billion euros and just hired a bunch of people? I don't know how many Greek people you can hire for 100 billion euros a year, but I bet it's it would make a good dent in your jobs prices, right? So now Greek doesn't spend that kind of money on a year, but certainly more than $1 billion. So how many people could you hire for €1 billion to just build the software you need to run your society based on the 90% already stuff that's out there? That's we're talking real jobs here, not just one or two, tens of thousands, even for a small country like Greece. So it really seems to be a no-brainer to do this, and mostly what is required is the political will to do it. So when the nation state was invented, we made some agreements with our governments about, who's really in charge. Again, this is me being a Northwestern European, so I'm like, the Netherlands and Germany, and this is our little part of history. And the deal was that the citizens surrender some rights, such as the right to use violence, to their government, and in return, their government protects them from, robber knights and foreign invasion and stuff like that. It seems post-Snowden that our governments aren't really consider themselves to be obligated anymore to protect our basic human rights, such as the right to privacy, which is, the number 12 on the list of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. It's number 8 on the European Treaty for Human Rights. So we really should explain to our governments that if they sort of negate their part of the deal, which is, we surrender some rights to you, so you can tax us, we hand over our weapons, and you get to be the only ones that have, but then you have to protect us, and you have to really do it. And if some foreign power starts messing with us, you have to do something about it, because otherwise you will no longer our government, and then, I don't know, we have to maybe do a revolution or something. So I love to rehack the US Declaration of Independence, which they actually stole from the Dutch Declaration of Independence, which was 150 years older. True story. But it is a fundamental principle that technology should be about people, not about the ability of companies to make money. I mean, if a company makes money selling technology, I'm completely fine with that. But if that is the only goal of technology, then we are really, really sort of missing some fundamental stuff. So technology should work for us, should do stuff for us, while maybe it's also doing some stuff for somebody else. And should be under our control. We should be in charge of it, not the other way around. So, when it turns out that technology has now become our enemy, then yeah, we should abolish it and we should get new technology. And yeah, the change process might hurt a bit, it might require some effort, it might require some of us have to learn a few new tricks. But we all went from DOS to Windows and Mac, and we all went from WordPerfect to Word, and as I remember, the world kept on turning, and water came out of the tap, and the lights were on, and children went to school, and we've gone through a bunch of these transitions before, and surely we can kick out most of this foreign software technology and just use our own stuff, and we should be fine, because we've already done it. Now, lower down in real user land, our problems are much more mundane, regrettably. So most people can't even deal with passwords because they need like 300, so they reuse them, and then when LinkedIn leaks its password database, you have a database online with 800,000 email addresses and passwords, and those combinations are of course used in 100 different places, and things end up very badly. But I do believe, and I've experienced from having trained a couple of thousand people now since 2009 on, individual, personal, digital security from non-technical people. You can teach people stuff. I mean, and really, it is not that difficult. Of course, those people need to want to learn it, and they need to, want to spend a few hours learning some stuff. But you can learn people what constitutes a good password and why it's important to have one. You can also teach people other stuff, like how does email encryption work. So, for those not familiar, it's called public key encryption, which means you have two encryption keys. One is public, it's on your blog, and it's on your business card, and it's everywhere. People can just download it. And you have a matching private key. And if Bob wants to send Alice a message in secret and not have the NSA read all of it in real time, then Bob will take Alice's public key, which is probably on her blog or something, and encrypt the message and send it to Alice, and Alice takes the private half, which is only on her laptop and nowhere else. And she, makes some effort to protect the laptop, obviously, and then she can decrypt the message and read the message. Now, we know from the Snowden document that most technology right now, that most of us use, is completely fucked, pardon my French. But we also know that there are some technologies that the NSA cannot get into, and well-used email encryption is one of those technologies. The NSA actually complains about the fact that some journalists use email encryption and other technologies, and that they are blinded when they do so. So that's probably one of the best endorsements you can have. That when the NSA says, we can't get in, that's the kind of good stuff you really want to use. So use the Tor browser, use email encryption, use encrypted chat, stuff like that. Last summer I co-authored a book on this, particularly geared towards journalists, but really if you're an activist or if you're just a citizen who insists on having privacy, you can use the book as well. It's over there. It's also for free as an ebook on my blog, so you can download it for free in a range of formats and just go through it. It takes about a day to go through it, and then if you just do what it says in the book, you've got a pretty sort of tooled up, secure system. Now, if you really want to go radical, you can do some hardware editing. So this is what I do with journalists who really go to seriously scary places like Iran, the Congo, Azerbaijan, or Alabama. And they really need some serious tooling, because, police states and all that stuff. So we remove the physical hardware that allows the laptop to communicate with the outside world. And then, so we physically take the laptop offline. This also includes cutting the wires to the microphone and cutting the wires to the speakers. Because it turns out that some of the viruses that our American friends use actually use the speakers and the microphones in laptops to communicate to other laptops via ultrasound. So even if you take the laptop physically offline, but it still has speakers and a microphone, it can be infected by the laptop in the room that isn't offline, that is online, and they can talk to each other and can be infected that way. This is one of the viruses that has been found recently. So we cut out all those bits that allow the laptop to read data, and then you can have a completely offline laptop with proper encryption, and you can have a really secure system. And we know from practice that if you use these systems properly, with the proper amount of discipline and the right tools, you can actually, even as an individual journalist with a €300 budget for 2 laptops, you can go up against the biggest surveillance organizations on the planet and you can still win. And so that's the good news, that we can still kick the NSA's ass for €300 to €400 on hardware budgets. If you, read up a bit and if you have the proper discipline. So you can still win. You can, really. It takes a bit of effort, but it can still be done. And so if you're a bunch of people here in Greece trying to do something and you might annoy the IMF, then you might want to think about, tooling up just a little bit and keep your plans not completely transparent for foreign powers. So laptops like this, they go for between €100 and €200 second hand. If you take care of them, they can last half a lifetime. The only thing that's going to break is the hard disk, but you're going to take that out anyway because it's one of those things that leaks data, so it doesn't matter. And then really, you can inherit it to your children, and it should still be working fine. Get a new battery every 3 years, and they're really fine. I've had laptops like this from 2008 that are still, doing fine work in Central Asia, despite being treated quite roughly. So all this stuff really means the technology community needs to really step up, but also the journalists. If there are journalists in the room today, and I'm hoping there are, really need to step up and start having different discussions with each other. The technology community, of course, for too long has been just talking about technology and not about the politics of technology, and also hasn't been explaining the technology to people who are not technologists. So that's what the Free certainly needs to do a lot more. You know, get maybe a little bit away from the beautiful command line stuff you've been doing and your super elite magical Linux distribution, and just explain basic email encryption to a journalist who might want to need a little bit of help. And yeah, as a journalist, you need to realize that if you really think that you don't need this stuff, then I deplore your lack of ambition. Because any journalist worth the name really should want to try to make life difficult for powerful people and powerful institutions. And as soon as you do that on this planet, you will be the target of surveillance. So if you're a journalist and you're not being surveilled, then you need to step up your game, because obviously you're not doing your job to be worthy of the title. Right? If you're a journalist and you're never getting arrested in your entire career, then seriously, what are you doing? I mean, really step up a bit. But yes, there are a lot of people now in Europe who are quite willing and able to help. So I've published the book as a free ebook because I don't want any financial limits. If people don't have a lot of money, here's the book for free, please use it. We're hoping to organize free workshops also here in Greece, specifically for journalists, but any other human being and citizen is welcome to join to teach each other more about particularly security. And we're hoping to discuss some of the policy stuff with the Greek government and with Greek educational institutions, so that maybe in the future we can have computer education that is also based on freedom and democracy instead of just selling more Microsoft licenses. So I think we're going to discuss all this in a panel, and I'm hoping that it will just not be us behind the table talking. I'm sure I'm over my time by now, so that's it. That link takes you to these slides. If you take the last 3 letters of the link and change it from open document presentation file to PDF, you can also get the PDF format. And there's even a PowerPoint uploaded somewhere there. These are my contact info, that's my P2P fingerprint if you want to send me encrypted email. All the stuff I talked about is on my blog. Everything I write on my blog is Creative Commons, so if you want to reuse any of it, then please do. I like to be informed when you do, but you are under no obligation. Twitter I really hardly ever use anymore because it is such a leaky system, but you know, if you really want to follow me, then apparently that's possible. So anybody who wants this presentation, and if you don't want to download it from my server, because of course, yeah, that will get you on the NSA shit list, then I can just give it to you today on the USB drive as well. So with that, thanks for your attention, and we're going to have a discussion.
Thanks a lot. We're going to have a panel actually, but I think that we can grab one question specifically for you right now. I don't know who would like to have a question. Probably.
Arjen, thank you for this presentation. As a journalist, I want to ask you something. The central message of what you described has also been published by big media outlets like the New York Times, ProPublica, American ones, The Guardian, which is the third. We're talking about the second and the third biggest news organizations in the world, in the Western world. And even I follow some institutions for journalism that are based in Harvard that are very, very critical towards Google and the way they manipulate facts and factoids, etc. So I wonder, how come they are free to publish those articles? Because they detail, as you detail, all of this technology and
But they don't really, because none of those publications has actually written at any length on the fundamental policy implications of this. So they will say, oh, we're all being spied on and it's terrible. But then they say, oh yes, but Google is a big company, so what can we do? It's like, you know, a slave saying, oh, but I'm a slave, so I'm not going to fight back. Because I'm helpless and I'm small and they're big. And so there is this deep helplessness that goes out of all these articles where the public also does not play a role, cannot play a role, and isn't expected to play a role in technology policy. It's really almost anti-democratic. Now, I'm sure that not everybody who works for The Guardian is a fascist, but if you read the article and you're not well versed in technology, what you come away with is we're all being monitored all the time by these massive, powerful institutions. Some of them are governments, some of them are corporations. The difference is pretty hard to see nowadays. And there's nothing you can do. Of course, what The Guardian should be writing about, that there is this other way of thinking about technology, and that's what we should be doing in Europe, and they have not. So, most of that stuff, what they do actually disempowers people, instead of pointing them to alternatives where you can really challenge. which is crazy, because I know for a fact that within the Guardian some people use this stuff. So there are people within the Guardian who are aware of all this stuff, because they use it for their own journalistic process to protect their communications, for instance. But none of the real discussion, also in the European Parliament, post the Snowden affair, none of the discussion has really been about the policy implications. So that as Europe, if we want to be democracies, we need to get off US technology. We need to do it really fast. We need to do it for political and social reasons, but we should have been doing it for 20 years for economic reasons.
So it is practical to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we have lots of examples in Europe where it's been done. The city of Munich has completely, removed Microsoft software from its 15,000, desktops and all its other infrastructure. It spent a decade doing it, and about 30 million euros. But all the 30 million euros were spent in Munich on local technology companies paying salaries of programmers who are inhabitants of Munich. So so they spend a lot of money, which otherwise would have gone to Microsoft, where it leaves your economy, and even the value-added tax over the 30 million then goes to Ireland and doesn't even stay in Germany. So it's like an economic no-brainer to do this, especially if you're a country that is a bit out of money. Then it's even more logical to do it. And so the lower labor cost is, and the less money you have, the more logical it is to say, look, there's all the software out there that doesn't cost money and that is free as in freedom. Let's take that, adapt it to our purposes, and the process of adapting will be done by people here in Athens. Our neighbors, our friends, and people who will then use the salary money that they get to rent an apartment and buy groceries and take care of the kids and do local stuff. It really is a no-brainer. But yeah, it's just very hard for people who have no technology background, but who make policy, to even know that there is an alternative. Because most people are so brainwashed by the media and by the education that they genuinely believe that a computer is something with American software on it, and there can be no other computer. So it's like living in a world where you've only ever seen Volkswagens, and then somebody shows you a Peugeot and tells you it's a car. And you literally need to explain to people, no, you can have something that is a computer that doesn't have Windows on it, because they've never seen it. Right? So it seems really basic, but for people who've never seen it, it's a new thing. So that's something that needs to be explained. But yeah, it can be done, it has been done, and it should be a no-brainer for police to do it. So I'm hoping we can, if journalists write about it, maybe we can talk to some people, and other people can talk to some people, and maybe we can get something started towards that. I think that would be worthwhile.
Okay, so